Chapter 8. The Global Shift. How this ism fundamentally changed world history and politics. The world now sits at a moment when the old maps feel provisional, as if drawn in ink that never dries. Rivers change course, borders fade into networks, and the tempo of events accelerates so that yesterday's certainties resemble the weather in a room that keeps shifting its walls. In Portrait of Philosopher Heraclitus, Pantaray, this chapter asks what happens when the ancient insight that everything flows is treated not as a metaphor, but as a political method. If there is an ism here, it is not a rigid doctrine, but a practice. To see political life as a perpetual process of becoming, to govern with an eye toward change itself, and to recognize that stability is a byproduct of well-managed flux. In short, the global shift is not merely a set of events. It is the world's most persistent demonstration of Panta-Rhei, the very principle Heraclitus called the law of becoming. 1. Panta-Rhei as a political instrument. Heraclitus's most famous image, "You cannot step into the same river twice," is not only a philosophical observation about water, it is a diagnosis of time, politics, and power. The river is a living argument that change is intrinsic, continuous, and inexhaustible. When we carry this insight into the arena of world history and politics, we begin to see that nations, markets, and ideologies are not fixed actors with unchanging identities. They are processes, constantly reinterpreting, recalibrating, and reasserting themselves in response to new currents. The habit of treating change as something to be resisted yields brittle orders that fail when the river swells. The method this ism encourages is not to chase stability for its own sake, but to design institutions and norms that anticipate, absorb, and even harness flux. If a polity can adapt its rules without dissolving its core commitments, if its leadership can pivot in response to pressure without abandoning its principles, then it has learned to translate flux into resilience. This is not relativism. It is political realism that trusts the river's currents to reveal who a society truly is, its capacities, its solidarities, its overarching vision for human flourishing. In this sense, the global shift is not merely about new technologies or new geographies. It is an extended test of an ancient claim. Order arises not from stasis, but from the capacity to reorder in the face of changing conditions. The ism of Heraclitus, let us call it fluxism for shorthand, asks the polity to become a craft of adaptiveness, a discipline of learning, and a habit of generosity toward future possibilities. 2. From city-states to global networks, the geography of flux. Historically, political power was anchored in tangible geographies, landed empires, fortified cities, sea lanes, and tax bases dependent on control of terrain. In the modern epoch, that geography has disintegrated into a more intricate mosaic, cities as engines of innovation, multinational corporations weaving supply chains across dozens of jurisdictions, and information networks that render distance less determinative than ever before. This is the first great relocation of power demanded by Panta-Rhei. Sovereignty no longer resides solely in a single sovereign's control of land, but in the capacity to orchestrate flows of people, capital, data, and ideas. Global politics has matured from a chessboard of rival blocks into a system of lanes, nodes, and corridors. Diplomatic influence now travels by multiple routes: formal treaty obligations, financial dependencies, technological standards, and cultural exchanges. The isthmus of capability, the ability of a state to mobilize armies, administer welfare, and project power, migrates to an elastic blend of institutions, public-private partnerships, and transnational coalitions. The result is a politics that must think in terms of networks rather than borders. This reconfiguration has outsized consequences for governance. If power resides in the ability to keep a system moving smoothly, then policy must prioritize the resilience and interoperability of institutions. This means adaptable constitutions that permit reform without tearing the state apart, flexible monetary and fiscal frameworks that endure shocks, and regulatory regimes that can recalibrate as new technologies redraw the landscape. The ism of flux thus becomes a practical day-to-day discipline. Design rules not to fix the world, but to steer it with enough elasticity to accommodate the next surprise. 3. The drama of conflict. flux, crisis, and the birth of order. Heraclitus famously observed that war is the father of all and king of all, meaning that conflict does not merely disrupt life. It generates motion, discipline, and new forms of organization. In a world shaped by flux, conflict remains a constant, but its form changes. It is no longer only armed clashes on defined battlefields. It is also economic competition, cyber operations, information campaigns, and the contest to shape global norms and standards. In the global shift, crisis functions as a pressure release valve and a catalyst for reform. Economic crises compel governments to rethink monetary frameworks and social contracts. Pandemics force rapid reallocation of resources and a re-examination of global health governance. Climate shocks demand structural shifts in energy policy and urban design. Each crisis, if managed with the fluxus sensibility, teaches societies how to rearrange their orders without dissolving them. The state learns to reallocate capital across sectors, the judiciary to reinterpret rights in light of new risks, and civil society to defend universal values while recognizing legitimate adaptation needs of communities. The paradox of crisis is that it often reveals a society's deepest strengths and its stubborn gaps at the same time. Flux teaches humility. We may not know what shapes the river tomorrow, but we can prepare our institutions to remain afloat, to negotiate, to recover, and to rebuild in ways that respect both shared human dignity and local particularities. The fluxus stance in politics is thus not fatalism. It is a disciplined optimism about the capacity of human institutions to reconfigure themselves while remaining faithful to core commitments. 4. Economic life in perpetual motion. The global shift is also a fundamental economic transformation. Markets are not static engines of efficiency. They are living ecosystems that adapt to shifting inputs: labor, capital, policy, technology, and risk. The Panta-Ray logic explains why economies grow not by rigidly protecting yesterday's industries, but by continuously reorienting toward tomorrow's opportunities, even when those opportunities are destabilizing in the short term. Creative destruction, Columbus's egg and the market's constant reinvention, produces both disruption and renewal. A fluxist economic order accepts that some firms will fail, some sectors will decline, and new sectors will rise from the ashes of older structures. The art of governance, in this frame, consists of providing social shields for those displaced by change, while offering incentives for innovation and retraining. It means investment in infrastructure that remains relevant as technology and trade patterns shift. It means a flexible tax regime that rewards risk-taking while safeguarding shared welfare. It means robust financial regulation that protects stability without stifling experimentation. Global supply chains embody the paradox of flux, highly efficient, yet exquisitely fragile. The recent decades of globalization accelerated interdependence, but crises, natural disasters, geopolitical disruptions, pandemics, exposed vulnerabilities. The fluxist policy response is to diversify, digitalize, and decouple risk where possible without dissolving the benefits of integration. It entails strategic stockpiles, resilient networks, and international cooperation that recognizes that the stability of one economy often depends on the stability of others. The ism's moral is practical. Embrace interdependence with a discipline that understands how shocks propagate and how to absorb them through redundancy, adaptability, and shared norms. 5. Technology, information, and the new rivers. Technology has perhaps become the most potent conduit of flux in the modern era. The river of information is not a metaphor. It is the infrastructure of contemporary power. Whoever can collect, interpret, and deploy information faster gains leverage over others. The political consequences are profound. Leadership becomes a craft of interpretation and orchestration, not simply of decrees. Public opinion is no longer a local chorus, but a chorus that can be amplified, redirected, and misdirected in real time. The fluxist view treats technology as both a solvent and a solvent-creating force. It dissolves old monopolies of knowledge and creates new hubs of influence: data centers, algorithm developers, cloud ecosystems, and standard-setting bodies for platforms. It also creates new political liabilities: misinformation, surveillance, digital divides, and cyber warfare. The global shift thus demands governance that can regulate fast-moving technologies without strangling their capacity to generate prosperity and innovation. Crucially, Panta Ray invites humility about technocratic prowess. No nation can claim permanent mastery over the digital river. Sovereignty now often depends on the ability to participate in international rules of cyberspace, to protect citizens' privacy while encouraging innovation, and to cultivate a domestic talent pipeline that can compete in a world where talent flows as freely as data. A Fluxist politics will invest in education, digital infrastructure, and inclusive access to technology, recognizing that the river's health depends on the health of all its tributaries, the diversity of minds, the inclusivity of opportunity, and the shared right to participate in the global conversation. 6. Culture, identity, and governance in flux. Flux is not only a matter of economics and technology, it penetrates culture, identity, and social life. In a world where flows cross borders with ease, communities negotiate what it means to be a people, a nation, or a civilization. The challenge is not merely to preserve tradition, but to recompose it into a form that can coexist with others while preserving basic human dignity and rights. The Fluxist polity treats identity not as a fixed essence, but as a dynamic project, an ongoing conversation about what a people wants to be when confronted with new realities. This leads to a politics of inclusion, multilingual governance, and pluralistic public spaces that accommodate divergent voices while preserving shared civic norms. It also urges humility about triumphal narratives. History does not move linearly toward a single teleology. It moves toward greater complexity, broader recognition of rights, and more intricate forms of cooperation and compromise. In practice, this means policy that protects minority rights, fosters civic education that emphasizes critical thinking and mutual respect, and constructs institutions capable of reconciling often incompatible demands. It means a diplomatic culture that sees cultural diplomacy as essential to security and prosperity, not as a soft afterthought. And it means places where people from different backgrounds can participate meaningfully in politics, commerce, and culture, so that the flow of ideas enriches the public square rather than threatening its coherence. 7. Case studies from the modern era, flux in action. To grasp the chapter's claim, it helps to look at concrete episodes where the Fluxist lens illuminates events differently than more static analyses. The emergence of multipolarity. After the Cold War, a unipolar moment gave way to a more contested distribution of power. The rise of China, the reassertion of regional powers, and the rapid diffusion of technology created a world where no single center of gravity can blanket the system. In this setting, successful governance relies on networks of cooperation, regional organizations, bilateral partnerships, and normative frameworks that can accommodate diverging interests while preserving a rough balance of order. Global institutions under stress. International organizations were built to manage a world of relatively predictable interdependence. The Fluxist critique asks whether these structures can withstand sustained pressure and adapt to new realities. Collective security arrangements that account for non-military threats, climate governance that transcends national boundaries, and economic institutions that reflect the reality of digital finance and cross-border data flows. The climate and migration dynamic. Climate change pushes communities across borders, often into destinations ill-prepared to absorb new populations. A Fluxist political culture treats migration as an accelerant of social learning rather than simply a problem to be contained. It seeks policies that expand opportunity and social cohesion in host societies while addressing root causes of displacement, and it prizes resilience in both sending and receiving communities. The digital revolution and geopolitics. Data has emerged as a strategic resource, and the governance of data flows, privacy, surveillance, cybersecurity, and cross-border data transfers is now a central arena of power. The Fluxist approach would insist on interoperable norms and international cooperation that respect sovereignty but prevent a fragmentation of the global information ecosystem into rival silos. Pandemics as systemic stress tests. The recent health crises underscored how interconnected the world has become. Flux calls for public health sovereignty that can coordinate with global systems, rapid scientific collaboration, and flexible social protections that adapt to evolving threats. It It also reminds policymakers that diversity in health systems and in research cultures accelerates resilience. Each of these episodes demonstrates both the fragility and the strength of flux. They show that the ism of Panta Rhei does not glorify chaos. It seeks the disciplined harnessing of change to protect people's security and dignity, while respecting the limits of power and the responsibilities of leadership. 8. Lessons for governance, institutions, and policy. If this Fluxist reading of history holds any practical value, what does it mean for those who design policy, institutions, and governance? Several threads emerge. Design for adaptability. Constitutions, legal codes, and administrative procedures should be robust yet flexible. Provisions for amendment, sunset clauses for experimental policies, and mechanisms for rapid crisis response can help a polity bend without breaking when the river shifts. Build resilience, not rigidity. Social safety nets, diversified economies, and redundant critical infrastructure reduce the damage of shocks. Resilience is not a luxury. It is a core instrument of governance in a world of uncertain horizons. Encourage experiment within shared norms. Flux is best managed through a culture that tolerates diverse approaches while adhering to universally safeguarded rights and obligations. Pilot programs, regional testbeds, and inclusive consultation processes can generate useful variations that inform a common path forward. Invest in human capital and inclusive growth. The perils and promises of flux primarily affect people. Education, lifelong learning, and opportunities for participation matter more than ever. Equitable access to the benefits of change, whether in technology, finance, or policy innovations, keeps the river from becoming a political divide. Cultivate a policy culture of humility. The river changes in unpredictable ways. Policymakers should practice scenario planning, anticipate tail risks, and communicate clearly about uncertainties. A governance culture that admits limits can earn trust when tough choices arise. Redefine security in a flux-driven world. Security cannot be reduced to military prowess alone. Economic security, cybersecurity, health security, and environmental security are embedded in a single, dynamic system. The Fluxist approach treats security as a continuously negotiated equilibrium among competing demands, strengths, and vulnerabilities. 9. A closing reflection, wisdom for the age of change. Heraclitus's Panta Rhei does not merely offer a cautionary tale about the inevitability of change. It offers a strategic framework for living with change. The global shift is not a problem to be solved, but a landscape to be navigated with care, intelligence, and ethical purpose. It asks us to cultivate institutions that endure not by resisting movement, but by learning how to steer it wisely. It asks political actors to recognize the necessary tension between unity and diversity, to balance the pursuit of common goods with respect for local particularities, and to refuse the illusion that history can be engineered as a straight line. In this sense, the ism of flux becomes a humane project, a method for making societies more humane in the face of relentless transformation. It is not a license to cynicism or moral compromise. Rather, it is a call to strengthen the moral imagination, our capacity to foresee consequences, to imagine alternative futures, and to craft shared arrangements that honor the dignity of persons while acknowledging the impermanence of every social form. The global shift, then, is the arena in which the oldest philosophical insight meets the newest technological, ecological, and social realities. The river continues to flow, and so must our politics. The challenge for leaders, citizens, scholars, and entrepreneurs is to learn to paddle with the current rather than against it, to chart paths through the rapids without abandoning principles that give life its meaning. If the isthmus between Heraclitus and contemporary governance can be found, it lies in this. We must govern as if change will endure, and we must endure change with a governance that remains true to the rights, dignities, and aspirations of all people. 10. Epilogue. Toward a politics of responsible flux. As the chapter closes, the reader is left with a sense that the global shift is not an aberration but the natural expression of a world in which every element is interconnected and in motion. The Fluxist project, courageous, cautious, and capacious, invites us to build political life not as a monument to stability, but as a living practice of adaptation. It asks us to honor the river's gift, knowledge of change as a reliable compass, humility before uncertainty, and commitment to a shared horizon in which every person can participate in the ongoing drama of becoming. In the end, the ism that drives this chapter is not a creed of inevitability. It is a discipline of possibility. It asks that we refuse two extremes, the paralysis of waiting for a perfect order that will never come, and the reckless zeal to force a fixed form on a world that refuses to settle. Instead, it proposes a politics of steady attentiveness to the present while preparing for the future, a politics of resilience that respects the flow, learns from the flood, and remains anchored in universal human aspirations. And so we return to the river, to the image that gave rise to the whole inquiry. The river does not stand still for long. It carves new channels, carries new sediments, and nourishes new life. If we attend to its lesson, we might not command the current, but we can guide it toward channels that sustain justice, opportunity, and human flourishing for generations to come. This is the global shift as Heraclitus would have it, not a catastrophe to be endured, but a continuous invitation to become better stewards of change. The chapter thus closes where it began, in recognition that Panta Rhei is not merely a theory of becoming. It is a practical ethic for living together in a world that never stops changing.